Trustees, anything?
Nope.
All right. So with no agenda additions or changes, no need to approve the agenda. So now we will go into public to be heard. So this is the portion of tonight's meeting where if there are any members of the public who wish to address the board about something that is not on the agenda, now is the time to do so. As this is the first time that we are using Zoom instead of Teams, down towards the bottom of your screen, there is a reactions tab or button. If you click on that, there's an option to raise your hand. I would prefer you use that instead of the chat feature. So please go ahead if you would like to speak to the board about something that's not on the agenda, go ahead and raise your hand using the reactions. Genevieve, I see your hand is up. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, yes. So it's just a note that to myself that with the creation of a new city of Essex Junction, first of all, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
With the creation of new city of Essex Junction, it comes to my mind that it's really important to consider it an opportunity to do things differently. I looked at the description of the job for the manager of a city of Essex Junction, and I know you will come to something different regarding this. And I just want to make sure that things are done differently from usual if we are to attract diverse people.
So Genevieve, we are going to be talking about the process for a city manager later on in the agenda. So if your comments have to do with that, then I would ask if you can hold on to your comments until that point.
Okay, I will.
Okay.
Thank
Did you have other things that were not on the agenda?
Just thanking you for all the work you did for us to become a city.
Well, thank you.
It's an amazing amount of work. I'm awed that I can trust the trustees.
And on to Montpelier to have the legislature pass that as well. So I am not seeing any other hands up. So we will go ahead and move off of public to be heard and on to our first agenda item, which is a budget workshop, including a discussion on the potential use of ARPA funds. Hello,
Hey,
Sarah.
everybody. It's gone a hot second and we're on Zoom now?
No, Sarah, I'm gonna make you a host so you can share. Okay.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Sarah.
Hey, everybody.
It's a new year. We figured we would just change things up a little bit.
Why
You
not?
just have to make me the host again, Sarah, or else when you hang up or whatnot, we will all go. So you have to promise to hand the baton on to whoever else is left.
Everyone is now responsible for helping me remember this.
Okay. All right, here goes.
Wow, the power. Okay. I am going to share screen 3. Okay. Where did you guys go? Oh, sorry. I want to see your
First time, Sarah?
Well, no, actually, yes. Let's just go with that.
Yeah.
There it is. Zoom, they're all a little bit different.
Right.
And my screens are all over the place. So thank you there we go. I just want to see your faces over here. Perfect. All right. It's still budget season. When we, there have been a few changes to the budget. So you should, just confirming you're seeing my budget memo. Okay,
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
All right, so this was the memo in the packet. This is an update on where we stand between the last time we talked budgets and this evening. We have made 3 changes to the budget since budget day. The trustees authorized or assigned excess fund balance from FY21 to offset the tax levy in the amount of $43,461. And Brad, also, you're on deck. I have a lot of emails from you. So we're going to, this is going to be a group effort here in a few minutes. So be ready with that unmute button, please. So in talking to Brad, I added the first year of the IT contract for FY23 at $40,000 so that we can continue to get some of these costs in here to get the city up and running. Although I do think that maybe that has changed since writing this last week, Brad. That'll be what I'll need your help here with in a few minutes. And I've added an additional $15,000 for a manager search and recruitment process that was not in the budget initially. As of writing this memo a week ago, we were working on personnel in the wastewater budget and thinking that we were going to make some changes to potential allocations or positions. And since publishing this, we have decided not to. So comment 4 here that there might be some additional changes to wastewater is no longer true. And so the wastewater budget is still being proposed as it was on budget day and as it stands further down in this packet. But I do anticipate our primary focus this evening to be the general fund. This leaves us with a budget of $6,383,415, a 13.2% increase over the prior year, the majority of which is raised by the tax levy. We're looking at a 12.5% tax levy increase as it stands, which would be about a 12% tax rate increase, about $113 over the prior year, given average grand list growth. A few other points I want to touch on before we start discussing is that we did have major staffing changes in this budget. So we have a full year of a village manager, village assistant manager / HR position. We did remove an administrative assistant position because we had previously had the assistant to the manager and an admin person on the village side with shared management on the town side. So we're just making adjustments to dissolve those agreements. We have a full year of the village finance director. We moved a tech services assistant in Brownell from part-time to full-time. We added an additional 6 hours a week of sub-time to assist in covering Saturdays. There is a new full-time position, or there's a position for EJRP customer service specialist hitting the general fund in this year. And then there was another adjustment, and then there was a final adjustment to another EJRP position that was mostly general fund and a portion program fund that's now going to be fully general fund. A few other items of note in the fire department, we did have a pay structure change, and we had pushed that out to start January 1st in order to help pull some costs down in this budget. I have seen some email communications discussing possibly pulling that back to July 1st. If that's something that the trustees are interested in doing, that would add $20,000 to the budget. We could easily put that in there. There is a considerable impact on the administrative fees paid by the enterprise funds to the general fund because of the way that is calculated. That's calculated, it's 50% of the personnel costs in administration and finance. And as we just heard, we're staffing up in those places. And so a portion of those costs gets then paid by the enterprise funds. So in addition to the 12% tax rate increase that we're currently looking at, there's approximately 10% increase in water and sanitation rates, with sewer remaining level because of some flow adjustments we had in the last few years. Missing from this budget, we have not yet started talking really in the budget about renovating to Lincoln and what that's going to cost and how that's going to be funded. I know that Brad has some ideas about that he and I have discussed. And we did finally get a quote for the HVAC project at Brownell, which is $115,000. And that is in some of the documents that I believe Brad maybe provided in the packet. I didn't look at the whole packet. I just pulled up my pieces before hopping on. And in part of our ARPA discussion as well. We have just gotten some new guidance. Oh, I'm the host, admit. Okay, that's right. We've just gotten some new guidance on ARPA. The final rule was issued last week or possibly today. January 6th, January 11th are getting confused in my mind. And there are some changes for the amounts and the restrictions on use of ARPA funds for the provision of government services. Those are actually much more lax than they had been previously. Though we are still in the process of reading the 400-page document. Few other questions that had come up on budget day that I wanted to note was we were talking about potentially postponing some of the roofing projects when we were talking before we knew that there was an expansion of eligible uses for ARPA funds, or where we would be with some of the ideas that Brad has this evening. We were talking about potentially delaying some roofing projects over at Park Street School or 75 Maple Street. The question had come up if we could use the 1 cent economic development tax for something in the budget that fits the criteria. I think this is open for discussion. I wasn't initially seeing anything that jumped out at me when we had this discussion, although in reviewing the language on the ballot when this was first approved, it really is more loose than I had. You know, my instinct was economic development, but it is more for projects designated by the trustees. And then we wanted to talk more about ARPA. I have a quick schedule in this memo that we can sort of talk about as we wrap up this evening about whether or not we need another workshop or if we're ready to warn our public hearing, and what that might look like on the calendar as we lead up to warning annual meeting. Brad, would you like to add any thoughts for discussion at this point? I do have the spreadsheet up and we can plug in numbers in various places and see how that changes the bottom line.
She says with a smile.
Or I could read these 2, 7, 9 emails from you. I think you can probably summarize it better.
Yes. So if you go to page 57 in the packet, and you don't necessarily have to bring it up, but that's where it talks about some of the other questions related to ARPA funds use in the FY23 budget and to Lincoln renovations. And I think I'm just going to start there. The important question that the trustees need to answer tonight, and again, we could have another budget workshop if we don't decide, with finality on the budget tonight, is do you want to use ARPA funds in the FY23 budget, basically to offset some planned capital expenses, which would reduce the transfer of capital from operating and ultimately reduce the total tax levy. The suggestion or recommendation in here is to do that to the tune of $325,000. There is flexibility, I think, either way to use more or less if you so choose. I have sent Sarah and Courtney a lot of emails just to make sure we're all on the same page that what is being suggested in terms of how that ARPA money is being used is appropriate according to the guidance. And that final rule did just come out in the last couple of days. And according to everything I can see, it's totally legitimate use of those funds. I highlighted some things, in the packet here that certainly there is a directive for transparency and accountability and public input as to the use of ARPA funds. I think, you have 3.2 million roughly that is going to come in at the end of the day. To allocate approximately 10% of that at this moment, 325,000 to use in the FY23 budget, I think is responsible. I think, we're advertising it in today's agenda. I would advise that we include specific ARPA language in the public warning and discuss it at the public hearing. I think that's one chunk of the conversation tonight. The other chunk, which we don't really need to decide on, is the other future uses of ARPA. And mostly I want to just get the temperature of the board on considering the use of ARPA funds for the renovation of 2 Lincoln, or do you want to look at using other funds? There's the Village Building Maintenance Fund, there's the Capital Fund, and there's the Economic Development Fund. And so we would just like to know, as we do further research on ARPA use, do you want us to focus on 2 Lincoln renovations there or somewhere else, or have other ideas? 2 Lincoln, as Sarah said, is not in the budget at all. So we need to have that conversation. Sorry, the last piece, and then I'll get to you, Raj, I see your hand, is I think, of course, I asked Sarah to put a couple of these things in the budget, and since then have also found, I think we can save a little bit of money, in particular, the 40,000 on the IT contract. I think that we have enough funds because of all of the changing components over on the village side. I think there's enough funds to cover that IT contract in FY22 money, and I don't think we need new FY23 money. I also think we can reduce that 15,000 that I asked her to increase the budget by for city manager hiring. I think about 10,000 of that is going to be spent before July 1. So I think we could reduce 10,000 there. And then there's 27,500 in the budget for a Park Street School HVAC ventilation improvement, which I think can be covered under ARPA, and that could be reduced. And then lastly, it's not in this budget, but it's something that's been a topic of conversation, is redoing the village website. It's not been redone, I think, in either since 2013 or 2011. There was a proposal for 19,000 to do that overhaul that was not included in the FY23 budget. Again, with existing funds, I'm suggesting that that could be done if the trustees so choose with FY22 money. And the reason that it's important to have that conversation is whether or not you want to use that money for that purpose. And it would add to the annual hosting fee about $4,000 to manage, annually manage the new website. Anything you want to add, Sarah?
No, but you might have to give that rundown again when we have the spreadsheet.
I will. I have it. Yep, I will.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Brad. Raj, you've got your hand up. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah,
You go
sorry.
first.
Thanks, Brad. And Sarah, that was a lot. I think I'm going to hold off. I think I found most of what I was looking for going through this at the end. So I'm going to back off. Sorry.
Okay. Then before we dig into the rest of it, I do just want to back up for a quick moment and go over for those who may be watching or seeing that 12% tax levy increase for the first time. I do just want to go ahead and mention that that is absolutely going to be larger than normal, and that it is likely that this budget is going to be an increase that is more than what we are used to. And this is overwhelmingly due to the separating and ending of shared finance and shared management with the town. And that really, until separation is approved by the legislature, then our village residents will see an overall tax decrease, even though our village taxes are going up. So again, the tax rate for the village taxes, that line item will be going up in a manner that's likely more than we are used to. And so until those town taxes are no longer being levied against village residents, that is when we would see a net reduction in our taxes. So to not necessarily be too scared when we see that. Also, that is the impact of having a vote to separate. Also, as we go through this overall, trustees, I really think that what we do want to do, and I think we voiced this during our work session, I just want to make sure we voice it again. I believe what we really want to look for is a budget that keeps the village service levels at the status quo until separation is approved of, to again try and help and mitigate any kind of tax increases that we can mitigate. I spoke a little bit there. Amber, why don't you go ahead and get into the meat of things?
Okay. So I have two kind of related questions. One is, if to Brad's direct question about using the 325 of ARPA funds, what does that do to the tax levy? And related to that, how does that work? Like, do we just assume that it's money in the bag, I guess, and we don't have, it's not like FEMA money where we have to like expend it and then get it back. We already have it. So there is no reason to, I'm trying to think of the right word, but there is no reason to like put those expenses in and then have to show the ARPA funds.
So great questions, Amber. And I just switched my screen to my spreadsheet. Is it legible on everyone else's screens? Okay. So the impact of adding $325,000 of ARPA grant revenue as a non-tax general revenue source brings the change in the tax levy down from the 12%, 12+% to 3.8%. And it brings that annual, that projected property tax bill on the average $280,000 assessed property down from $112 to $32. To answer your second question, Amber, ARPA funds have already been distributed. They're distributed in 2 installments. The first installment has been distributed. We have those funds. We have them in a separate fund in the accounting system, and we have the cash on hand. So unlike, FEMA, which is the worst example of the reimbursable grants, but even other reimbursable grants that are more timely, we already have the cash. So we have the unearned revenue on hand.
Is there any downside? Like, is there any potential that if we expend these funds, the 325, based on the final rule and stuff, that is there any potential that we are going to be on the hook because we misspent them, for lack of a better word, not in accordance with the rule? Or do you think
the rule just came out?
I know,
but the preliminary reading of it and the general understanding of provision of government services is anything your government normally does. So hiring and funding administrative and finance staff, or funding the general fund operating budget at current service levels. So we're not talking about a new program. We're not talking about a deviation from the things that we've already been doing. We're talking about the continuation of government services. And so I think that category is broad enough, and looking at the general fund and specifically, I would feel confident that does count. And the dollar amount is reasonable to start with. The new rule does state that if you received less than $10 million, you can just go ahead and use it all for the provision of government services. So it's actually a shockingly loose rule, given some of the other things that come down from Treasury. Did I answer your questions? Were there more than 2? And Brad, if you have anything to add, just jump right in.
I would just add, Amber, that I just want to be clear that what we're all doing, everything we're working towards right now is the village becoming a city. And using ARPA as a one-time funding tool is an attempt to hold this budget somewhat still in order to get to the point that we're a city and no longer pay those town taxes, as Andrew was talking about, and then we'll see that tax change. I think the risk that everybody should be aware of is if for some reason we don't become the city, we will then face these same challenges next year if we are to continue to be a village within the town. So my intention of advising to use them is that I think this charter is going to pass and that we're going to become a city, and we're going to see those tax changes in FY24. If we don't become a city, then we will have to face these more difficult questions and may face again a 12% some odd increase or something like that next year. So I just want people to be aware of that. That's what the strategy is here. It's like using fund balance.
Thanks, guys.
George, is your hand in relation to the ARPA funds?
Yeah, it is. And thanks, Andrew. You kind of you actually kind of answered my question. With Amber, but you went over it so fast I didn't quite get it. So I'm going to ask you to go back over it again, Sarah, and just really to simplify, because I can't understand, facing with an unprecedented tax increase, why we wouldn't use every single penny of ARPA funds available to us right now. I mean, keep in mind that the select board is looking at about a 4.5%, but 5% budget increase. So you're asking village taxpayers looking at something on the order, it could be like a 15-16% overall tax increase. This is like red alert. Why wouldn't you use everything? So my question is to get focused. Sorry for lecture there, but how much total ARPA funding is available to us this year, and why? And I understood. I went through your projections, Brad, and that's great. I kind of understood the logic, but can you just kind of really simplify why we aren't going to use all of it? What's the downside of not using all of it right now? Just in as simple an explanation as possible.
Oh, okay. Simple explanation. So all of it is 3.5 million, 3.2 million. Which one is it on the village side, Brad?
2.
3.2. Okay. And we have half of it now, and we anticipate receiving the other half in late summer of this year. So by the time we're finished the FY23 budget, we will have, by the time we're in FY23, we'll have it all. We could budget it all and know that we would have it to spend during the budget year. I would not recommend lowering the tax levy below prior year levels by using ARPA money. I don't think that that's what you're getting at, George, although
No,
you
I'm
did
not.
say, why wouldn't we use all of it?
Okay, I'm not asking that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to try to understand. Why wouldn't you use, instead of reducing the tax levy, why wouldn't you pay off some future capital projects or something? I mean, I'm just not quite getting what it seems like you were trying to hang on to a chunk of it for some reason, and I don't know what that reason is.
I do think that the reason, we haven't decided what our other uses are. What do
Okay.
we want to use the other, $3 million, $2.9 million for? And now that
Okay.
we know we could use it all for the provision of government services, that really broadens what we, what the possibilities are. And we really haven't
Okay.
spent a lot of time having that discussion. And so this is using a piece of it to
Okay.
help with this one unique issue that we're faced with
Yeah.
now, to sort of
Okay.
bridge the gap, and then leaves us
Right.
the remainder to decide what we want.
Okay, but Sarah, just to clarify just go back one quick point. By usual tax levy, what do you mean? What is the usual tax levy? You're talking about what our tax levy was last year in Essex Junction, or are you talking about something else? I'm not clear what you mean by that.
I can't actually remember saying that. So
Okay.
what did I say?
You said you wouldn't use it to go below the usual tax
Oh,
levy.
correct. So I would not reduce this line here below where it had been in the prior year. And
Okay,
reduce
good.
taxes for
Okay, we're
1
on
year.
the
I
same
think
page.
Brad,
Just want to make sure I understood what you're saying. Okay,
yeah,
good.
Brad really nailed it when he said it's like using fund
Right.
balance, right?
Fine.
Because we only have it this one time, and we only,
Okay.
we have to spend it before a certain amount. But if we do
No, that's
get
fine.
crazy,
I got you.
we're
I
gonna
got
have
you.
to
I
fill
understand.
that hole.
I understand. Okay.
Awesome. Brad, was I clear enough? Are you in agreement with that?
And if I can add something, George,
Yes.
the usual, if I remember correctly, the usual tax increase of the village is usually below $30 a year.
Right.
It's usually 3-4% in terms of a rate increase. I think that's a good target area. Second, there are projects that are on the books that need to also get funding, including, as Brad mentioned, we have work to do at Park Street School. We
Right.
have HVAC work to do at Brunel. We have a water main replacement on Main Street that feeds a third of the village that is going to be pricey, that would eventually lead into increased water rates. These funds could also be used for those projects. And I would suggest a more in-depth discussion of where they're going to get allocated. Plus, the federal government, as nice as they have just been in this final ruling, which, as Sarah mentioned, is about 400 pages, is also highly recommending, and as does VLCT and others, having a public input process. And that has not occurred other than normal meetings. So there you have my 2 cents.
Okay. I'd be happy to explain to the public why we would be spending this money. I'd be happy to engage them on that.
Go ahead, Raj.
So I'm looking at page 59 with the scenarios. And that seems to kind of cover all 3.2. Is that right? I did do my homework. I'm just trying to
Yes,
understand. This feels
and-
like a lot. Sorry.
It is, and I got deep in the weeds on this memo because I just wanted to make sure you understood kind of those different categories of where the money can come from. But what's changed since this memo was written last week is that before we thought only part of the money could be used for the provision of government services, which is this really broad category. And now all of the money actually can be spent for the provision of government services, not just a limited amount.
So the bottom line is we've got 3.2 million. You're suggesting we use in FY23 $325,000 to get ourselves to a reasonable tax rate. Use it for some of the projects you've outlined. and leave the remaining 2.8, whatever it is, to decide at a later date, have some public input, and figure it out.
Yeah, essentially, I think the only other thing that we would want direction on tonight, which would affect the FY23 budget, is if you want to put that Park Street ventilation project in, commit ARPA funds to that, then we could remove it out of the general fund.
Okay, and the only other thing I'd say about the ARPA funds is I think, we don't know what's coming down the pike for this pandemic. How many more situations like we are in right now we're going to be dealing with, and how we might want to use some of these funds at a later date to help our residents. We haven't heard from them yet or asked them what kind of help they may want in that regard. So I think, not committing all of it is a great idea right now. Having a thoughtful community conversation about what we want to do. But we do need to figure out a way to get that massive that tax rate increase down. So this looks good. I'm just trying to digest it. And giving the go ahead on a Park Street school pulls out that 27.5. But you're not suggesting to do the same with Brownell?
We could. It doesn't affect the FY23 budget per se. It's just a project that was in the building maintenance fund. The plan is to still do a $50,000 transfer in FY23 to that fund.
Okay.
So then it would just be whether we move that project out of the building maintenance fund and into ARPA. But we don't have to decide that tonight.
Got it. At least I think I got it.
All right, thank you for that, Raj. Amber, I see your hand is up. Before I go back to you, Brad, one thing I'm a little concerned on page 62 of the memo, when it talks about the eligible uses, it's under and in terms of the provision of government services and that justification. I get concerned how, first off, it talks about eligible uses - revenue loss. And then the second part to that statement of for the provision of government services is to the extent of reduction in revenue. And so I realize the final rules just came out, that with it be 400 pages, I'm sure they haven't been thoroughly read. I would be concerned if we have to provide some kind of justification as to how we would have lost the $325,000 in revenue, and that's why we're using it. And if we can't make that justification, then are we going to find ourselves in a few years down the road having to pay that back anyway?
Good news. The part of the final rule that has been thoroughly read by Courtney, myself, and Brad is the part about this revenue reduction, because this provision of government services is so broad and we really want to understand it. The final rule now says that if you received less than $10 million in ARPA funds, that's us, you may use all of it, up to all of it, on the provision of government services without producing the lost revenue calculation. That basically the Fed is saying it's reasonable to assume that under that $10 million threshold, you have lost revenue and you may use it for the provision of government services. We will have to make a one-time irrevocable election to use that standard allowance, I think they're calling it, as opposed to proving we have lost revenue. But I do suggest that we do that, because the lost revenue calculation, while it's doable, it's calendar year versus fiscal year, and it just gets complicated because we did bring on EJRP during that look back period, so it looks like we have crazy spikes in revenue. So we have scoured that provision of the final rule, and we will continue to do so to ensure that we're in compliance with it.
Great, I really do appreciate that, Sarah. Thank you, as that was my concern. I would certainly be in favor of using 10% of the ARPA funds for lowering the tax increase. In general, I would be in favor of using the ARPA funds for the ventilation projects, both in terms of Park Street School as well as Brownell, and using them fully for that, given it aligns very well with the intention of the funds, and I think could either help to further reduce tax increase and or allow those capital funds to be used for other capital projects that we need in this community. I am also sharing my concern with Raj about allocating all of the funds now, or even frankly, an overwhelming majority of those funds, as we don't know what the future holds for us in regards to COVID. I think it makes sense for us to hang on to some of these for a few more months to have a good idea as to what the future will hold. And also when it comes to the two Lincoln renovations, for one, I would not be opposed to using some ARPA funds for that purpose. I also wouldn't be opposed to asking our community about whether we want to even look at a smaller bond to fund the renovations at 2 Lincoln, given that that is something that would certainly last for more than 30 years. And I think that may be another conversation we may want to have. That's all I have on that one. Dan, before I go back to Amber and then George, was there anything you wanted to add in?
No, I agree with the conversation so far. Now getting the clarification on what the funds can be used for and how much, I agree. I think we should hold on to it. Some of these capital projects, as we all know, with inflation, cost of building materials and such, when you're buying something when it's high cost, you're getting short on your money, where if prices come down, obviously you have a lot more buying power with that money maybe down the road, who knows, but just something to think about.
Thanks, Dan. Go ahead, Amber.
I think I know the answer to this, but want to ask it anyways. Does the reduction in the 325 for the ARPA funds, does that affect the utility rate increase?
The way I have it plugged into this budget and the way that we've discussed it, it does not.
That's what I thought.
At the moment.
Make sure.
But I just have it plugged in as as like a non-tax general revenue source. Okay, the wheels are spinning, but correct, as I have it now, no. Because that is based on the budgeted expenditure for personnel and administration and finance as it stands.
Which is not impacted by ARPA.
It's not impacted by the move we just made.
Yep. Okay. Thanks.
Go ahead, George.
So could you go back and put scenario A and B on the screen, Brad? Can you do that? Or I'm not sure who's in charge of the screen.
Sure. I am.
Oh.
And what's scenario A again? No ARPA?
Scenario A and B. We had back where we were discussing the ARPA funds. It's two scenario A and B. It's not in your spreadsheet. It was in Brad's piece. It was
Page 59, Sarah.
Yeah, there you go. And up, I think you go up this
one more up.
A little,
okay.
Boom, 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 boom. Okay. So
I got it.
Okay. So we've got a total of $1,600,000. Is that correct this year? Is that correct?
We currently have that cash in the bank, and we will get another 1.6 the end of this month.
Okay, 1.6 million. So we did scenario B, but instead of taking 150,000 in the village building fund, if we tack that onto ARPA, that would give you $475,000 we're going to use from ARPA. Is that correct? And we're going to deduct that $475,000 from $1,600,000, which gives you, quickly do the math. What is that? About 800,000 that's left over that we aren't using of this year. Is that correct? I mean, we're going to do 325 plus 150. So it's 475 minus. So you've got over $1 million. You'd have over $1 million left this year. And I'm just asking for because Raj, you said it, and Andrew, you said it. You're concerned about keeping some money in there. Well, how much money do you want to keep in there? What are you planning to do with $1 million? That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to help people with COVID. It's a lot of money to, have as a rainy day fund for next year to help us with stuff. But I'm just wondering, why not go with scenario B, but take the village building maintenance fund and just and tack that onto ARPA and get that done and leave that out of the, or Sarah, does that lower us below, does that put us below the tax levy if we do that?
Well, not necessarily. I do believe that you all are aware of this. We have to obligate the funds prior to December 31st, 2024.
Right.
And then we have to spend them before 2026. So as we're long-term planning, that's the period of time you have to work with.
Right. Okay.
So George, I think what you're asking me is, what if we made this 475
Yes.
instead of 325?
Bingo. That's what you went right back to the thing I was going to do. Okay. So
Okay, perfect. You know, I'm more comfortable in the spreadsheet.
I know you are. See, I know that. Okay. So
that basically keeps our tax levy at the same level as last year. I would like to look some more at that final rule. If we could if we could balance the tax increase, have a reasonable tax increase, and somehow offset that administrative fee coming in from the enterprise funds, I think that would be reasonable. That would be a nice balance. The provision of government services is very broad. I do know that the original revenue calculator had excluded water revenues randomly. And so I don't want to say that we can just go ahead and do that right now, but even a reduction in the tax rate, in the village, just about everyone is also a water and sewer user. So those two things might wash, but some balancing is needed, I believe.
okay.
Go ahead,
Did I
Rob.
answer your question, or did I go off?
Yes, you did, and you let me make my point. Thanks.
Okay. You're welcome.
So don't necessarily want to leave all of it for ever. But one of the questions I have is, so let's say the legislature doesn't get around to or doesn't approve the city this year for whatever reason. And as someone said earlier, we're in a position of having these positions and paying town taxes as well. Can any of these funds, if we don't spend them, allocate them right now, and that scenario comes to pass, continue to be used for the provision of government services and help reduce that impact? So that would be another reason why, holding on to some, and I don't have a number in mind, George. But
no, I know.
We've got an awful lot coming up. And if we can get the budget to a place where people are used to, as opposed to what we've got now without committing too much, I am completely confident in the legislature is going to approve the city. What I'm not confident about, what I'm less confident about is timing. And that's minimal. I'm not that concerned about it, but we don't know what's coming up. It's been a tough month already. They've only been there for 2 weeks, and so anyway, so if that can be used, then it might, if we're slower to spend it until we see what the legislature is going to do, that might be something to think about, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, and to your point, Raj, I think we could be allocating these funds up through FY26. I mean, if we have till 12/31 for 24, at 12/31/24, we at that point are planning for, or have hopefully come close to finalizing the FY26 budget. So really, there are several more budget years that this could be utilized in.
George, Raj, are those hands holdovers?
No, I just want to get and I'm not going to stray far afield, Andrew. I know you're going to rein us in and just talk about budgets and ARPA, but I do want to make a note, just what Raj just said about concern if there's a delay in the city charter for some reason, and how that might impact us. And this point has to do with another business item that we're going to be discussing later on, and I'll stop there, but it has to do with the manager search. Thank you.
I do want to go back to the 475,000. This 150,000 from the village building maintenance fund was a potential source for 2 Lincoln. Okay. I was thinking if that was going to be for the Brownell ventilation, then we needed to add in the offsetting expense.
No, and so if I could just summarize too, Sarah, the other suggested changes. So if we can agree on allocating the 325 or some number from ARPA to be utilized in the FY23 budget to offset costs, and we agree that Brownell and Park Street ventilation are ARPA directly related and intended uses, that's 150 of ARPA. So that it still gets us to the 475 of ARPA funding. It's just that it doesn't remove the 115 Brownell project from anything because that was just coming out of the building maintenance fund. It does remove 27.5 from the FY23 budget for Park Street. The other suggested movements, there's 40 grand out of the IT contract, 10 grand out of the city manager hiring, and then adding 4,100 if we proceed with the website. All of those changes get us down to a $70,423 increase, which I think will be sub 2%. And I can walk you through those again, Sarah, if you wanted to go each of those steps.
I think I picked them all up, but your Park Street School R&M budget is now 0. Do you want to go down that far?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And
Brad,
that
when you were saying,
me pretty close.
when you were talking about the Brownell ventilation being used by ARPA, did you also say though that would not reduce, or that would not reduce that budget?
It wouldn't, that was planned to come out of the buildings maintenance fund. So it wouldn't reduce the tax levy in FY23. We would still transfer the 50,000 in there unless you didn't want to add the 50,000. I think it's probably best practice to keep adding money to that fund because you'll continue to have building maintenance. It just means that project doesn't need to come out of that fund. So that fund would be larger to either be used for 2 Lincoln or be saved for another building project down the road.
Great, just wanted to make sure that I understood that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Brad, I think the one thing I'm missing at the moment is, were we going to increase the annual web hosting fees?
Yeah, plus 4,100.
Brad, who is that that's doing, who in this scenario for the website, who is that? Is that Civic Plus or is it the current?
No, it's
local company?
EcoPixel, yeah, the village-based company.
Okay.
So what number did you come up with, Brad?
7423.
So do I.
Perfect.
Wow.
Nice when the math works out.
Love it when a
that-
plan comes together.
And that increase is, am I seeing a 4.11% increase?
You
the
are
tax.
you are seeing a 1.46% projected tax rate
Okay,
increase.
sorry, looking at the wrong line.
Yeah, which is about
That's small.
$14. I do have the proposed town data
what I was
in
looking
here. This is stale. It has changed. So we should just not look at that on the screen
Okay.
right now because we have a final amount and I don't have it off the top of my head. So on the village side, that pulls it down. Actually, I would say below where.
And what's the total ARPA funds being used for that purpose? Something like 475, 500, 540?
Actually, at the moment, it's $325,000 with then the ventilation projects in the buildings maintenance fund or in ARPA to take care of those. Did I get that right, Brad?
Yeah, so it does end up being 475, 325 in the FY23 budget, and then a commitment to those 2 ventilation projects out of ARPA in the future.
Okay. Seems reasonable.
And then if we end up using ARPA funds for 2 Lincoln, which is not a decision we need to make today. But as we saw later on in that memo.
That's right. I think it's another conversation. You have a full agenda for today, but I think we need to have it sooner than later. There's not money budgeted for that. So if it's not ARPA, it needs to come from somewhere or another approach, as you suggested, Andrew. I think the challenge with going to a bond vote is going to be timing of everything. And as I mentioned in the memo, I think FY23 is the most ideal time to make these renovations happen at 2 Lincoln. There's very few people that work in that building at this time. And if all comes to fruition and you're going to really open these offices on 7/1/23, it would be nice to be moving people over into an environment that's ready to receive them rather than move them over and then ship them out within the next year or two to a warehouse for 8 months. I think people who worked at 81 Main can speak to the challenges that brought to displace them. So that would just be a consideration.
Totally agreed. So if we're all set on ARPA, there were some other questions, I believe, that were in the memo. I believe the fire department is one. That's the only other one popping into my head, but there were others.
Yeah, that was. I did want to take the temperature of the board and see if you were interested in maintaining that Jan 1 start for the pay structure change, or if now that we have or bringing it back or doing it. Okay, so we're good with January 1st.
I'm good with January 1st. The chief was good with it as well.
Okay, and I saw some other head nods as well. I think we have those items covered then. There have been no changes to the capital budgets that were presented at budget day, the rolling stock, the village capital, the water, sewer, sanitation capital, or the water, sewer, and sanitation budgets. I do have, oh, so actually, are you all ready to move on from the general fund? Okay, so moving on from the general fund. We do have at this point, since budget day, the, actually, Brad, I didn't ask you this, but would you like to talk about your program fund budget tonight? I have EJRP program fund, enterprise fund budget, and senior center enterprise fund budget. And then those were the only ones that we had not talked about yet. We don't need to do that this evening. We could do that next time. Sorry, not so that I didn't queue you up for that or sooner. And then there have been no other changes to the other budgets. So.
I'm happy to answer specific questions about the program fund. I think the program fund in general is pretty straightforward in that the expenses are associated with the programs and parks and facilities and administration that needs to be done in order to run EJRP. I think it's it's somewhere around a $2.9 or $2.8 million program fund budget. And I think our, general fund budget is, I don't know, in the 800,000 or 900,000. So, again, the vast majority of the funding that goes for Parks and Recreation is coming from user fees, I think is the general take. And I kind of look at the general fund as the shell of providing, the electricity and turning lights on, and for some of us administrative staff, but everything else is really covered in the program fund.
Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
It's fine.
Anyone have questions about that? About the budget that was included in the packet? The other enterprise fund budget that is included is the senior center enterprise fund. There are minimal changes from FY22 in discussing with Nicole. The seniors are interested in restarting some small local trips. Of course, this all depends on COVID and where we are with that as the year progresses. There are some fee structure, some slight fee structure changes proposed to the luncheon program to help make it still affordable yet sustainable with the cost of the program. And other than that, there are minimal changes. This is, like Brad was saying, with the program fund, this is supported completely by membership fees, donations, and fundraising, with the building being provided by the village and the administration being paid for out of the town budget. Are there any questions about this little budget in the larger budget? Were there any questions on water, sewer, and sanitation that have come up since budget day?
Be straightforward.
I don't have any questions about it.
Thank you all. What about on those capital budgets? all mostly continuation of well thought out and designed plans that have been in place and have been working. That
I do
Lauren
have-
put together, I did not try to give myself credit for those.
You can take credit for it, Sarah. Sorry.
I've kept the spreadsheets rolling forward, but
big
she
part.
did have a
Big
great
part.
long-term view.
I do have a question, if you can go to the actual capital fund itself.
Be happy to.
So if I'm looking at this correctly, the bottom of FY, wow, okay, that was moving. The
What?
bottom of FY 25, I
Yeah.
think it starts to show we go into a deficit.
Yes, it does.
So it looks like, and that's including with the planned 15% annual increase, correct?
That's correct. Mhm.
So it looks like from FY 25 forward, we're either going to need new revenue sources in local option tax, or we're going to need something else.
I'm sorry, did you?
I
Did you
sneeze local options tax in case anyone missed that.
I
Just
wasn't
wanted to
sure.
be clear. Okay,
Well,
but George actually might want something to say something.
well, I just want to, I do want to jump in, Andrew, because, and I'm not trying to be political here, but you're right. We will need to start transferring more money into our capital fund, but we will no longer be contributing, hopefully, to the town's capital fund. So you should theoretically be having more money to transfer into the village or the Essex Junction capital fund.
That was the only point I was looking for, Sarah. Wanted to make sure I wasn't misreading it.
You were reading it correctly. Well,
Can I?
was someone, whose voice was that?
That was me. I'm trying to decide if I want to go down this road right now. So where we are right now is you said 1.2% tax increase.
Correct. We're
Using
still
the-
at that 10% water and sanitation rates.
Right, and you're trying to figure out, you're going to spend a little time seeing if there's a way somebody's going to spend a little time seeing if there's a way that can be mitigated.
Yes.
So maybe I'll hold on this question until we get an answer, because it sounds like, I'm looking at this schedule, it sounds like we're probably going to have another workshop day to answer some of these questions. We're not going to come to, I'm guessing we're not going to come to the point where we can warn this tonight. So
I think that's reasonable. That's where I was headed back to the schedule. We could touch on it one more time with that question, with that last piece. I really, what I'm thinking is that ARPA, that 325 of ARPA. So really the only option here, not only option, but short of changing the way we allocate admin fees, which I do think, once new staff are on and settled, looking at the way things shake out is important. And who's spending time doing what and what that looks like. So short of trying to do all of that now without new staff and things not shaking out, I think really the only option we have is to take some of that $325,000 that we put in there as general non-tax revenue and reduce the amount of transfer coming over from the water and sanitation funds, which will push that tax levy back up slightly. So really, there might be some balancing out that needs to be done there. That's
Would
really
that-
the idea I have right now. My goal is to grab Courtney and Brad and pick their brains in the morning.
But if I'm understanding how that, in the village anyway,
Mhm.
99 point something % of residents are water and sewer users, right? There's only a handful,
Correct.
maybe more than a handful. So it's not like the whole town where that would be impacting people disproportionately who didn't use water and sewer. I'm just thinking this through, sorry.
That's fine. That's
Because I guess I'm just going to preview what I was thinking. I don't want to add more to the budget necessarily, but our first go round, we had hopes of doing some ordinance stuff and in that area that we cut. And I'm wondering if that's something we might want to revisit this year or just simply hold off, because we do have quite a bit coming up in the next 16 months. So that's kind of where I was going. I'm not anxious to add any more money into this budget necessarily, but if there's an opportunity leveraged from the ARPA funds, there's just something I was considering. But the wastewater, the whole water increase thing is concerning too. So
Mhm.
I guess we'll have to see how that can equalize or shift around first.
Raj, I think to your point, maybe a question for the rest of the trustees to think about is, if I remember correctly, the memo from Robin in terms of the ordinance enforcement was something like adding $40,000 or $80,000. I don't remember the exact number. I want to say it was somewhere around that to the legal fees or to our legal services line item, so that way we would have the funds to have our attorney see these efforts through the court process. That would be the ordinance enforcement portion. And so maybe just food for thought, think about whether we want to explore that or not.
And Sarah, remind me, how much of an increase in the budget is 1%? It's roughly, what are we looking at, 45, 50,000?
1% to the tax levy,
Yeah,
37,500.
okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's what, all right. Okay,
I hope I did that right. Yes. Decimals always throw me a little bit.
well, if they throw you, the rest of us are in trouble.
All right. So we will hit some of that final question. How do we balance out this admin fee, this right here, going to water and sewer, likely with ARPA, and making sure that that's allowable use under the final rule. And we'll talk about these budgets one more time. At this point, that's going to be planned for the 8th of February. And we'll make it happen. So we'll see you guys then. Oh,
Thank you, Sarah.
and I have to make Marguerite the host again.
I was going to say, before you leave, don't forget to change the host.
Thank you so much. I almost forgot.
Thank you, Sarah.
Secure. Yes. Thank you all.
Bear with me while I get back to the agenda here.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
And so, yeah, our next item is to consider warning the public hearing. Nope, kidding, because we're not going to do that this meeting. We're going to do it the next meeting. So we would go to the city manager hiring process.
Great. And the only other question too, Andrew, is if you all can next time just give a sense if you wanted to proceed with the website project or not. It's not in the FY23 budget, but I think can be handled in the FY22. And we just would like to know if you want us to proceed or hold off. Either way is fine. Page 65 in the packet talks about city manager recruitment and hiring.
Put it up. I just didn't know. Got it. There you go. Perfect.
Okay. So here's the memo. Basically, the summary level is that the suggestion or recommendation is to create a hiring committee. It's been suggested 7 appointed citizens, including a youth plus 2 trustees for a 9-member body, to begin kind of in March with developing a hiring and recruitment plan. This is not necessarily the recruitment and hiring committee. This is the planning group. So they will come up with whatever systems and plans there are. And there's a series of deliverables suggested in here from this group. And basically they'll do the recruitment and create a plan for recruitment, create a plan for hiring, what kind of interviews are going to happen, who's going to be included, community members. If we proceed with this, we could
Groups, BIPOC, transgender, the need to bring a youth member, what would they bring?
For me, I would say that it's a part of overall diversity of thoughts within our community, and that the youth would be somebody under the age of 18.
Them, but
4 to 6 weeks to the boards as well. But that was going to be mine. And Dan, that'll address kind of what you're talking about, and I hope we have more than one, but I want to sort of guarantee that we're going to have someone that's been engaged long-term on those issues around diversity and all of that, from both the government and representation area and public safety. And like I said, I hope we get more applicants than just one, but I think it's nice to see that youth seat there. I think Essex High School has a good track record of producing some very engaged and bright students around governance and things like that. So I think they'll bring a really interesting perspective. So I guess my formal proposal would be, in addition to the youth seat reservation, to have a reservation for a seat from the Essex Best committee.
Thank you, Raj. Go ahead, Amber.
I just reread and now I'm not sure that I have the question, but I'm on board with this. The only thought that I had as I was reading the advertisement was that we wanted to limit it to residents within the village. And I think now going back and reading it, it says seeking the assistance of village citizens. So I think it's probably clear enough, but open to thoughts on that.
It's similar to a conversation I was had a while ago. Instead of citizen, maybe resident.
Yeah.
Because we have non-citizens who do live here, and we don't want to necessarily exclude as just because you may not be a citizen doesn't mean you're not paying taxes to live here.
Yeah, well, the other thought that I had is, do you say village residents or folks that own business owners in the village? Because I do think it's important to have, you know, you might not live here, but you own a village
Big
business.
investment in the village by them.
Yeah.
Is this I'm sorry, did I just spoke over somebody?
What I was just going to say is, in terms of the business owner, we could always look for a business owner who may be interested. If we want to seek the input, I think that maybe from a business owner, we'd want to try and reach out to some who we think may be well suited for that, instead of trying to advertise throughout all of Chittenden County and beyond to try and, you know, get a business owner who may just submit an application. You get what I'm saying?
I think we're looking at a business owner that has a business in the village. I assume that's what you're talking about, Andrew. So somebody,
Yes.
not to specify, but maybe somebody like a Gabe Handy type, or somebody who's invested in the community, had multiple businesses here, has an idea of what's going on, and could bring some valuable insight or input to the process.
I think I'd rather keep it to people that live in the village at this point, especially for this initial formation of the, Brad, is this supposed to, it says through August, is this supposed to just be the committee that's coming up with the process and figuring out how we're going to go forward? It's not a screening committee for applicants.
No, this is the planning committee. And so I think it's an important distinction, Raj, because, you know, some of what you were talking about, Dan, in terms of reaching out to different populations of folks within the community, in terms of reaching out to business owners, that might be a strategy that this planning committee recognizes, that, hey, we want input on the qualities and characteristics we're looking for in a city manager. Whose input do we want? Well, we want to make sure we get input from business owners. So how are we going to accomplish that? We want to get input from minorities or from the LGBTQ community. How are we going to get their input? So those are the kinds of conversations I would envision this committee having. I think it's good to be cognizant of who the membership is, but I think, you know, we could quickly create ex officio 7 seats, business member, best committee member, youth member. I don't think we want to go too far down that road, and maybe just leave it open a little bit, but make sure that some of those, I think you'll be able to influence the process still at the trustees, and we could add that, you know, to some of these recommendations or some of these objectives if you want to have some clearer language about engaging the entire community.
Thank you, Brad. George, I think you've gotten it.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to just switch tempo here for a second and ask a couple of questions. We've all been on lots and lots of boards and committees by this point in our political careers. And I only asked the question, why, if you don't have to, would you have a 9-member board? Why wouldn't you have a 5-member board or a 7-member board, which can be produce pretty much the same product, particularly for what you're talking about in the initial phase there, but probably do it a lot more efficiently. That's only criticism. I don't have really strong, powerful feeling about it, but a 9-member board seems a little bit unwieldy. My main concern, and it goes back to the piece, our subject we were just talking about with when Raj and I were talking about it, is what happens come May, and the legislature, the city charter bill has been hung up in the General Assembly, and someone wants more information, or for some reason or other, we do not become the independent city of Essex Junction, or we have a delay to become the city of Essex Junction. And then, as we were just saying, this time next year, we're scrounging around trying to find $40,000, $20,000, $50,000 to cut from a budget. Why lock into, we may regret locking into a new manager's contract is going to be very expensive. It's the most expensive contract that we'll have. Why lock in when we might need that money? And possibly, I know that we have Brad, and we're very fortunate to have Wendy and Brad come forward, but maybe we could look for a part-time manager, or we could look for some other scenario that gets us across the bridge until things get cleared up in the legislature. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I hope it doesn't happen. I hope it's a very dim possibility, but the thing is, by simply waiting 1 month to initiate this manager search process, you would probably have a lot more clarity on what it is exactly this committee is going to do. That's one observation. I just want to throw it out there. I'm not trying to derail anything. Lastly, in terms of the youth question, how about this as a proposal? Because I'm going to guess that there aren't too many high school students out there that are fascinated and driven by the subject of choosing a municipal manager. I understand that teenagers want to get involved, and I'm all in favor of them getting engaged in the committee. But I think this is a kind of a committee. I don't think most teenagers are interested in this particular subject. Again, I could be wrong. So why don't we say this? Why don't we not reserve a youth chair, but we say if a youth applies, we will appoint a youth. But instead of, because I would like to, I'm more interested in seeing a committee. And if I look at your what they're going to do, it seems to me the most interactive and deliberative and piece is understanding the input of the trustees. What is it what are the qualifications that the trustees are looking for, and figuring out how to express them in documentation that gets advertised. That seems to be the most critical piece. And I'm only concerned in one thing from that committee, that they get that piece right. I don't actually care all that much who's in doing that interpretation. If high school students can do it, that's great. If other people can do it, that's great. But that seems to be the action piece. And I just want to make sure we get that part right. But again, those are my criticisms. I don't want to slow anything down or derail it, but I think generally overall, the whole concept is good. Thanks.
Andrew, can I jump in here?
Sure, go ahead.
So there's a couple points to this that I've just listened to. 5 people is 4 fewer voices from our community than maybe different voices than we've heard before. So, throughout this whole manager search process, we're creating a new city. The community's pumped. We had a massive turnout. Everybody wants to get this thing going on the right foot. We want to do things a little bit. Most people want to do things a little bit differently than we've done in the past. We want different results. We want a different path forward. The more seats brings more voices. The more voices we have, the better result we get. for the planning committee and then for the selection committee, as far as I'm concerned. If no youth step forward, no youth get appointed. If one person steps forward from that, from any population and they're not fitting the bill, we can punt. I think the idea that it doesn't matter who's coming up with this, I don't know if that's exactly how you meant it, George, but who, as long as they're listening to what the trustees want, I think kind of serves to negate the whole purpose of getting different voices in here and getting a different, more, the result we're looking for, and the result I think the future city's looking for. If we're not concerned about who's making these decisions, we might as well just go out and hire a firm and just take whoever they bring us. I think the community wants to participate. I think they have a lot to say. I think it's going to be messy, a little bit messy, but it'll get done. And I would hate to limit how many people can come forward and participate in this process. And I'd hate to rush through it too quickly and for the sake of getting it done. I also don't frankly mind, Brad, I'm not sure. I've read all of this, but what would be the downside to waiting a month? I mean, I just, George brought it up. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point, George. I think there's a few ways to do that, right? You could wait a month and see kind of where things go and revisit this conversation. You could wait even longer. You could wait until May, really, if you wanted to see the bill go all the way through. Or wait until April if you had much more confidence that it was moving its way through both chambers. I think all of that's fine. I think you just need to be aware of what the timeline is then after the fact. But I think it raises a good question, George, which you don't have to answer tonight, but should be thinking about is, if the city charter does not go through for any reason, does the board still plan to proceed with hiring a village or city manager? Obviously village manager at that point, with future intentions of being a city manager. Right. Because I would definitely agree, George, you don't want to task this committee and have them engage in this work and then say, thanks, but no thanks, we're not actually going to utilize your work. Maybe we'll use it next May, but we're not going to use it this May. I don't think that would be a good approach.
Right. Thank you, Brett. Can I just jump in? I just want to clarify something and with just to react to Raj, because I guess I'm just a little confused, and we're probably not. I think the thing is, we're not necessarily in disagreement. I'm just confused over who's doing what here. I thought this committee that we're setting up is going to set the schedule, appoint a chair, and then take input from the trustees and sort of come to some consensus about what that input from the trustees means and try to put it into some kind of job description. This committee we're setting up is not a screening committee, which is different, I would say. Then you might want to have more diversity on that. But maybe I'm misunderstanding. So if I am, forgive me, but I'm sorry. So it's my fault. So I'm just not clear. But that's probably just me and not anyone else.
Well, it looks like the objectives with input opportunities from the public, staff, and department heads are, yes, there is the timeline and strategy, which is rather dry. There's the community profile, which could be interesting. There's identified desired qualities, experience, and education of the ideal candidate. Writing of the job posting is going to, be the initial attraction for whoever is going to apply, and identify the recruitment and advertising plan. I mean, all of those things benefit in their own way from having a diversity of voices at the table. It looks like we're just one part of it, but the way it's written, the way Brad or whoever wrote it was, they're going to actually go out and some way seek input from public, staff, and department heads and us, I guess.
Okay.
So it's not just what we're looking for. They're going to write this job description. They're going to write this ad. And I think, I don't believe we're going to be spending inordinate amount of time, interviewing candidates and going through this, and nor do I think it's going to be a waste of time. I don't think you do either. I don't
at all think it's going to be a waste of time. But again, in response to what you just said, I think that, the only thing I would say is that there needs to be understanding from everybody on the committee that ultimately that the decision is in the trustees' hands. And so they may want to give a little more weight to our insight and, what we think that the job calls for. Integrate that maybe a little more heavily than the other information they get. But as long as they can do that, I don't have a problem. I'm still kind of trying to parse out who's doing what. So yeah, I don't mean it by any way to try to limit the community engagement in this, but I thought that was going to be down the road when you actually have candidates and they're going to come through and they're going to be community interviews with citizens and staff and so forth. So I'm a little confused, and I'm going to stop talking before I make myself even more confused.
I think that, again, just overall, this committee, yes, would be tasked with the process, come up with that process, the recruitment, the hiring process of actually hiring, of actually interviewing. And I think that some things that we could do, such as a 9-member body, we can say up to 9 members. I think it is an assumption in saying that we will get 7 fantastic community members. I think it's a fairly safe assumption that we would get that, if not more. So I think that we could, once we see the applications and once we speak with the candidates, I think we can also go from there in terms of finalizing whether we want to appoint 7 members of the community or not. If we find ourselves where we have 30 fantastic candidates, I don't think we want to appoint all 30 individuals, as we do want to have some constraints to the committee to make sure that things can actually happen. But we do want to make sure that we can get those diverse opinions that we may not always get. Raj, is that a hand as a holdover, or is that a new one?
Sorry.
Andrew, can I just quickly comment? You said 30, obviously, which I agree with you, but since this is a committee, they're going to be subject to Robert's rules. I assume you need a quorum, so you have 9, you're going to need at least 5 people showing up. Obviously, more people you get on board, the more you're going to have people that are unable to make meetings, just as bad as it is for us with all the meetings we have. Just something to think about.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I don't think we'll have much of a difficulty in getting interested applicants is I know that in talking with some residents about some of the open committees we have, one of the pieces of feedback I tend to hear more frequently is a lack of a desire to commit to a seat for, say, 2 to 3 years, but rather a short-term committee appointment like this that would be a matter of a few months is something that would be much more palatable to many. So I think that it would go along pretty well. Trustees, unless there's any other questions or comments, or Brad for that matter, or any other staff, if there are no other questions or comments, I know that there was one member of the public who wished to speak earlier on this topic, and I know I saw a hand up from another community member, and it might be a good time to get some public input. So not hearing anything from the trustees or staff to the other of that. Genevieve, I know you wish to speak, or you were beginning to speak to this item during public to be heard. If you're still with us, why don't you go ahead and you can kick things off?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
So I apologize. I hadn't seen the entire trustees packet before, and that's all my apologies. I tend to go a little fast on things at times when I'm very motivated by things. I hear George being a little worried about the process, like the difference. And my view in this is, if you do things like you've always done, you're going to get what you've always gotten. We want, and I'm not the only one in this village, to have a city manager that represents the entire population. We don't want another old white male. I apologize, I'm very direct, but that's the way it's always been done here. And that's not okay. I'm not a feminist. I consider myself a humanist, but I'm getting a little tired there's too much name recognition in this town. And I'm not necessarily myself interested in serving those companies, but I am interested in having people who may not have some experience of others, but who know exactly what to say and where to find what we are looking for. And I think I'm not the only one in this town to be interested in seeing more diversity. It's all well to have trainings, but what you need to do is look at things differently. If you want to have 5 people with 2 trustees, you are going to get what you've always had. Richer, whiter, same thing. We have a unique opportunity to create something different. We're a small place. That's a big thing because we can make things happen. The census numbers indicate that the population of BIPOC people has gone up quite a bit. There is more and more people of color, more and more interracial couples, more and more immigrants. And it is reflecting in our population. We're not far from Burlington. We need to be reflecting this for the future. If we're looking for right now, it may not be very representative, but we have to look towards the future. What are we doing? We need to be more representative of people across the spectrum. People from marginalized communities. How are you going to involve them? Then they don't necessarily look at the internet, and yet they are very good to have on board. I get very frustrated by the uniformity in Vermont. I get really frustrated. I think this is an opportunity we can't miss. I just ask you to not do the same old, same old. Otherwise, you're only going to have very educated people who have an excellent background, and you're going to get somebody good who's just like everybody else before, who does not represent the entire population. You will have disconnected people. The success of the city depends on our being very creative. And I'm going to stop there, but I encourage you to look for different lenses.
Thank you, Genevieve. One thing I do want to just very quickly note, I don't want anyone from the public during this conversation to in any way feel that the board is at all being disparaging to our current manager by either having this conversation or in anything that is being said, as that would not at all reflect our evaluation of Evan or the conversations that we've had. Our community has done very well by Evan, and we are very appreciative to him for his time here. So I do just want to make sure that that is being expressly stated tonight. So Andy Cooper, I know you had your hand up earlier.
Hi, thanks, Andrew, so much. I put my hand up because I was frustrated about the conversation about youth on the committee. Anyone that's been coming to our school board meetings recently would know that youth is integral to a community conversation. To write off youth as though they're lacking in value in the conversation, or to say that they are, I'm sorry, I'm really frustrated. I'm trying to stay really polite. It's our future, you know. You need them there. It's an absolute. It belongs there, and it's great that it was there. I was excited to see it. Yeah, I feel really strongly, and I'm going to stop there because I don't know how to articulate it without being overly frustrated. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Annie. Carmen, see your hands up. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, I would like to also just a couple points that go along with what Genevieve and Annie said. To Genevieve's points, I do think that going along with the same standard procedures of hiring, you're going to get the same results in the end. trying something a little bit different, bringing more diversity that's going to be reflective of the community is the best way to go. To Annie's point with the youth representation in a selection committee or process, the high school students are amazing. Having a 18-year-old that just recently graduated, don't underestimate these children. They are a lot more engaged and a lot more in tune than what a lot of the community wants to give them credit for. A lot of their engagement is more on a national level because that's what they see all the time. But as everybody knows, the important decisions come at a local level, and you want to get their attention, brought it back into local government. They teach these things at high school. They have after school activities that deal with government and business. And these are great experiences to have for those children as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Not seeing any other hands up. Annie, I see your hand is up. Go ahead. I would just ask to be brief.
Yeah, I just realized what I wanted to say. Thank you. When my son was in high school, he was struggling to stay dedicated to school. And thanks to community support and very important people and integral people in our lives, he was able to recommit to high school in a new way. But one of the biggest arguments we had was when he was a sophomore. And the school kept calling me, and the guidance counselor kept calling me. People kept saying, you've got to get your son to do his homework. You've got to get your son to do his homework. So for like half a year, I rode him like that, right? And then one day, he sat there really still. And then he turned around, and I wish I had a video camera at that point on, which of course I did not because we were just in a private conversation. And he articulated the best laid plan for education I'd ever heard in my entire life. To this day, it slays me that I didn't write it down. And it was 4 sentences. And my same son spoke at his high school graduation as one of the speakers, not due to his grades, but just to his personality and how he was there. Please, it's so important to give youth a chance to be involved and committed. It's so important. And thank you to EGRP for doing that for my children. EGRP is the reason that my children are leaders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annie. Seeing no other hands up, we'll go ahead and bring this back to the board. I think that in terms of recruitment, Raj, you had mentioned it before about having a best subcommittee member. I think that's something that would be useful, is not just the typical advertisement in Front Porch Forum, Facebook, those types of channels, but also directly communicating with our already appointed committee members in the various committees we have, such as Essex Best. If the Voices for Views, so Voices of Inclusion in Essex and Westford, I think that there are some other avenues like that that may be able to help with increasing the pool of potential committee members we have here outside of the typical channels that we go through. Raj, go ahead, and then George. Raj, you're muted though. So close, so close.
Like Sarah, it's my first time on the Zoom. Brad, the sample advertisement looks great. The one after this whole, thinking about this week and listening to comments tonight, the sentence, citizen committee member traits and experiences that would be beneficial but are not necessary include, if we can put something in there, this seems a little, it's going to sound crazy, but it seems restrictive, right? I know you say are not necessary. If there's a way you can craft that into something a little more inclusive, even if it's something that says, or you're simply interested in helping to create the new city of Essex Junction, or we especially want to see people who are recently, I don't know, I'll think about some stuff tonight and email you some suggestions, but I just want to make that as welcoming as possible. Because if we're trying to get other people in, I think while they will read the not necessary part, people will probably be like, oh, that's not me. But I totally get why you put it there, why you put those items there.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, so Andrew, what do you have in mind if we're at some point, the five of us are going to have to get together and say exactly what the credentials are and what sort of skill sets we're looking for, what sort of experience, what we see some of the challenges and so forth. What's the process? I'm not even asking, I'm not even going to put you on the spot. You don't have to give me an answer, but I'm saying, maybe I'll put it this way. I'll suggest this. Could you be thinking of what kind of process we need to have to do that between now and March, so that when we meet with this committee, and to get to the point about slowing it down, and maybe just the recruitment process takes a month and a half or 2 months, and maybe by the middle of March we'll have more of a feel of how well this is going to go. But to get back to my point, so that whenever the committee gets together, we are all on the same page in terms of what the credentials and the skill set and the experience that we're looking for. Could you be thinking of some kind of a process like that? And I'm going to suggest that, because it might touch on personnel issues, maybe it has to occur in executive session. I don't know, or part of it does, or something like that. But anyway, suggest you be thinking of that. Thanks.
Oh, I do have some thoughts on that, and I also have a feeling, especially since he's unmuted himself and just raised his hand, that Brad also has thoughts on this issue as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's good to clarify, George. The intention of this memo, and it's important the trustees have this conversation. I think the intentions behind the memo is that this is a community grassroots-led process, and I did make a note. I feel like it said, Raj, you read that with input opportunities from the public, staff, and department heads. I think I should have specified with input opportunities from the trustees, the public, staff, and department heads, to specifically call that out. But I think the language, George, is a little different for me. This is not a board. This is not a committee that represents the interest of the trustees. It represents the interest of the community. And the trustees' voice will, yes, be important in that, and will need to be taken into account. But they will also take into account the voices of the general public, staff, and department heads in developing that robust job posting and community profile. And so I guess that's where there's that disconnect that you're talking about a little bit, that I don't see there being an instrument of the board, rather a community group that's fulfilling the process, which ultimately the trustees will have final say. So obviously it is important to know what you're looking for, but right. And I don't think what you're looking for will be too out of line with what the community is, but we don't know that until we reach out and have some opportunities for people to weigh in. And then, somebody's going to have to blend all of that feedback together into a document.
Let me give you, if I can just follow up, Andrew, real quick for just 1 minute. Let me just give you an example. I'll get a specific example. Okay. And this will go a little far afield. So right now we are in a lawsuit against the state regarding the testing of copper in the sludge that gets produced over at the wastewater treatment plant. And that's a highly technical issue, and it's a very expensive issue. And the manager doesn't need to understand it, the science of it and everything, but a manager has to be capable of a certain level of technical understanding. And I could go on for a long time picking out technical, legislative, legal, financial issues like that a municipal manager has to be able to be engaged with. And if this committee, I don't want to get into that. I totally support any diverse candidate we can find, but we have to have some basic standards, and the committee has to understand that if they deliver a bunch of candidates who we just can't see plugging in to the village, well, then what are we doing? Or we're setting someone up to fail. So that has to be kept in mind. And I think our input is pretty important.
I agree. And I think there's also an important distinction between a job posting, which is the advertisement, and the job description. And the job description is already built, and that's something that the trustees can look at. I don't expect the community group to really change the job description of the city manager. It's pretty standard. And there could be some nuanced language that you all want to put in, but they're not going to change the job description. It's more about the advertisement that goes out to recruit those people and give candidates a set or potential applicants a sense of what it is this community is seeking. And I just want to come back to the youth piece, and this is not at all anything that I'm going to fall on my sword for. It's a suggestion. I think it might be part of a larger conversation for the board as to how and when to utilize that. I think if you don't specifically call it out, then you won't get those type of applicants. I think a general high school or middle school kid would not assume that this advertisement is seeking their participation. I think I did not prepare myself with the research, but I could, if you all are interested, about the amount of research that's out there about the importance of including youth in adults' decision-making and the impact that it has on youth generally, of making them feel connected and empowered in their community. And so maybe I was opening a bigger conversation too soon with our first committee together out of the gate. So again, I'm not going to fall on my sword for it, but I just want to put that out there, that I think it should be part of future conversations, and maybe that's just a whole another agenda topic someday. So I don't want to force it right now, but I do think there's a lot of value in it. And I think, we do a lot of great things in this community with youth. And I think this is a way that the municipality can contribute as well.
Just to help call it out, I also wonder about, in terms of that advertisement, when it says the trustees would like to appoint, maybe adding in a diverse 7-member citizen committee. That way we don't necessarily need to say how many people we're looking for that fit into one of the many categories that we're looking for, but just rather keep it more broad.
Great.
And then I just also do want to, in that parenthetical note about where input should be sought. Yes, please do add trustees in there.
Yeah. Do you, Andrew, I'll take wherever guidance you want. I guess it sounds to me like maybe there's a little bit of tweaking and work that could happen to this and bring it back next time before we get an ad out, or are you saying you'd rather proceed, Andrew?
I think what we could do is, I think we could proceed as what we've talked about, and maybe get a list of the applicants on that February 8th meeting, and go from there, where, to George's point about delaying, we could see whether, we need to do some more targeted outreach, whether with what we know at that point in time, we feel that we do want to solicit more input or put a pause on it. But I think for now, we could always just put this out and see what comes in. And if we need to, we can make tweaks later. I just know that there's a lot of, I feel there's a lot of energy to start this process sooner rather than later. So if we can at least get the receipts of interested community members sooner rather than later, I prefer that. Raj?
Marguerite, are you there?
Yes, I am.
I wondered if, thank you. How you doing? I'm wondering if you knew if Essex Best had a date for reporting out.
Not technically, but we are leaning at the February joint meeting. That is the unofficial official date. Which I don't know if it's on a calendar yet, but yes.
Yeah, I don't see a joint meeting. And
right, I think that's a different topic, but that is
okay.
also on someone's.
Right. I just wondered if they were going to coincide, if one was going to happen
one
before the other. Okay, thanks.
Right, no problem.
So is there anything else we need on this?
Andrew, do you want those applications to come in to staff or to come to you directly? Do you have a preference?
Goodness, I don't want.
Great.
I would recommend that they come into staff and probably direct them to Tammy Getchell.
Yep.
She's very good at organizing things like that.
I also would hate to have one of us elected officials receive it and then be accused of receiving or not receiving something. Yeah.
No problem.
Thank you, Brad.
Mm-hmm.
So going on to our next item, 5D, a discussion about a village-only local options tax for annual meeting. I did request this come to our board, and I'll just start talking while the transition to the next topic is happening. Just based on the select board's decision at their last meeting to not go forward with a local options tax for this year. It is something that we in the village, we've talked about for years, and we've put off for years in terms of trying to work collaboratively with the town with merger. Now that that is off the table, merger is off the table, and that we are going down, or that we are looking to separate, and that the select board is not going to move forward with a town-wide local options tax, I wanted to at least have us have this conversation about whether we wanted to have a village-only local options tax. And I know that there was a memo in the packet that should be making its way on the screen shortly for those who haven't yet had a chance to read it. Evan, were there other, I'm sure there are more portions to that that are beneficial for the trustees or the community to hear that are in that memo that frankly I'm just blanking on.
Could you, I missed the first sentence or two.
What else from the memo would you like to point out?
Oh, from the memo. For those people at home, local options tax is a very fancy phrase for something that's very similar to a sales tax. It is a 1% tax on sales. There's three categories. There's food and beverage, there is sales of general items, and then there's a meals and rooms tax, which is stays at hotels and things like that, or catering at hotels. Many of the local communities in Chittenden County have this tax. Williston, Colchester, I'm going to go off of memory, Winooski, Burlington, I believe Shelburne has those, Colchester and possibly Milton all have these taxes, as well as about 15 other communities statewide. It is a general fund revenue, meaning that revenues that come in would generally come into the operating fund, but it does not necessarily need to be used for any particular operating costs. In fact, one of several communities have portions of this tax that go to capital funding. As we talked in earlier, there are a lot of capital needs of any village, any town, any city, including whether it's fire equipment apparatus. Excuse me, just to get a little wonky, today, if the village were to replace its ladder truck, the starting price would be about $1.4 million, and the apparatus lifespan 10 to 15 years. So if you were to amortize that, you would need $100,000 a year for 15 years to repay, and whatever the cost would be of that piece in 15 years. You would probably need about 17 years of $100,000 just to replace one piece of equipment. A pumper truck is somewhere in the neighborhood of $700,000, an engine truck. We have at least one of them in the Essex Fire Department, Essex Junction Fire Department. Those are just some things. There are numerous parks that the village owns that have varying pieces of equipment in it, whether it's playground equipment or a shelter, or there are properties that you would like to have a shelter that you don't have. There's all kinds of community amenities that the community could look at and say, okay, we want all these things, but how are we going to pay for it? The local options tax is a new revenue. It can be directed where you see fit. It can be used from capital. It could be used for buildings. It could be used for amenities. It could be used as the community sees fit. And so I think a good example is looking at our neighbors and how they're using it. Very simply, they are using it for capital. They are using it for bonds. So if you talked earlier that let's say you were going to bond out the city hall building, and let's say you borrow $1.1 million. A simple 10-year bond at 4% has $40,000 of interest and $100,000 of bond to pay over a 10-year period. That would raise your taxes, as you see earlier today, by a couple percentage points. Maybe with the local options tax, the citizens looked at that and say, oh, we'll pay, 140,000 of the proceeds of the bond for the first 10 years will go to this bond payment, and they will not see any rise in their taxes for that project over those 10 years. So it's a creative way of using new revenue that's not already spoken for. It could get to community needs and wants. And it is also using a very valuable but not very well tapped use of people who don't live here, who shop here, drive through here, or work here, but don't pay property taxes here, but do spend money here, but are not currently, they are helping local businesses, no doubt, but that extra 1% would go directly into the community. I can tell you that a particular family member that I'm very fond of, it goes to Starbucks, and she goes there a couple times a week, and if she was to pay the 1 cent, she'd still go to Starbucks, and that money that she spends here, like so many people who drive up and down the Route 15 corridor or the Susie Wilson corridor, stop at Starbucks, and that extra 1 cent is not going to change their behavior one bit. They're going to go. And then the people that come from out of town that stay at one of our hotels or in the area or eat at our restaurants, most people, they just go to eat because the food is good. That's what they wanted for the evening. And they have no idea what the sales tax is or a meals and rooms tax. It's just on the bill and they pay it. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions about the memo or about the tax and or the process. I will add that the state does take the first 31% of any taxes created in the village. That is their lovely state of Vermont ability to pay for many other items in the state budget. It was interesting to read that they couldn't live in the first 30%. They also had to add a 1% fee for actually collecting the tax and processing it versus what they were taking off the top. But that's Vermont.
They could have put a fee on top of the fee for taxing for collecting the fee. I mean, they could keep going into it, you know.
But it does help the state in many ways, and they get use of the funds however they see fit. But it's just something that's really odd that the state that I used to work at took a 2% fee total.
Thank you, Evan. One thing I want to also just frame it with is tonight, we're not looking for approval from the trustees, or I'm not looking for approval from the trustees to put this on the ballot. But really, what kinds of questions do you have, or what would you need to know in order to make a decision is the intent of the conversation. And I think the hand order went with Amber first.
So I had a couple of questions, and maybe one of these questions I'm overthinking too much, but my first question was, if we put this on the ballot and it was approved in April, does that mean that implementation is like May 1st, or, you know, when would we start seeing the benefit of funds from the
More than likely, it would take several months for the Department of Taxation to do its work, probably about 4 or 5 months. And you would see your first set of revenues the quarter after it starts. For the quarter. So let's just say you approved it in April, you would probably have it effective probably September, October, and then you would see that quarter's revenue come the following quarter.
So we've also heard many times that the state is unable to distinguish between 05452. Like it is one in this. If the town has already said they're not putting this on the ballot, what does that do for, I mean, you just used the example, Evan, of Starbucks.
Yep.
So Starbucks is technically in the town.
Yep.
So if I go buy a cup of coffee, let's just assume that we have.
I should have used the nest.
Okay, that's a better example. So I guess my question is, how does the state distinguish? Are they going to have a difficult time distinguishing if I buy my cup of coffee at Starbucks versus the, because it's one and the same, though one is not subject to and one is.
Sure. So
And I don't, I mean, I might be overthinking that one.
A little bit, but we've been in talks with the state a little bit. One of the reasons why it does take a bit of time to get up and running and established is the state is going to ask the village/city for data on the addresses within the village. Okay. And so with the use of the village and the town's GIS, Geographical Information Systems database, we can provide the state with all the addresses that are contained within the village. If there are any other questionable ones, that's something the state and the city/village would have to work out. If there's something in question as to where they are actually located. They also, one of my other managers in a local community said they may even go with a questionnaire to the remitters as to asking them what their 4-digit zip code on the end is at their address, if they don't already have it from the state. So, hope I've answered your question.
You have, thank you. I think the last question that I have is on the memo about how the tax affects businesses such as CVE and Global Foundries. I think that question has been asked numerous times. I don't know that we've had an answer to that question.
Over the years, the state has gotten much better at explaining their exemptions. There is an entire state code on exemptions. Electricity and gas used in production is not taxed. There's a whole list, and that's some things. So one of the things I watched the town meeting, I think it was 11, maybe even 12 years ago now, 2009 maybe, where it came up, and there's lots of discussions. How will it affect global? I have a email out to their VP and general manager trying to get a meeting so that he could give me some input. But in general, they have a commissary/lunch area that they sell food in that would be subject to the tax. But I would need him and his company to tell me how it would affect them and how greatly, if at all, other than their food and beverage. But you are not subject to the tax for building any materials that you use in the production of your product. Through this tax, whatever they're done with the state, we don't have anything to do with.
I do think, I'm trying to put my finger on it, but there are some really good FAQs on the state's website that were actually circulated to the Capitol Committee back when we started this conversation, which I think would be great to include in maybe the next reading file for the public to readily have access to, because I did see in reading through all of the responses to the survey, there were a lot of comments about the taxation, and they were inaccurate statements about what is and is not taxed. So those FAQs are really written for citizens. I know you guys included the statute, but that's great for me as a lawyer. But even me as a lawyer, I can't follow that statute. So I think the FAQs would be great for the next round. I know we're not deciding on this today, but if we could put it in the reading packet next time.
Thank you, because I struggled. How much do I put in? What are the questions going to be? And the FAQs are certainly something we can get our hands on quickly and
Yep.
definitely put it in the next reading packet. It is
Thank
a
you.
lot of reading, though.
Yep. Yep. Well, those FAQs are only like a couple pages each. They're not very long.
Thank you, Amber.
You mentioned the Convention and Visitors Expo. That is a very interesting business because a lot of their business is through vendors. And so it is not a central point of purchase. And that will take a little bit of chat with the Department of Taxation of how that works. But when they do have point of sale, like they had a craft show and they have a central cashiering function, that's easier to deal with than say 15 or 30 or 50 independent vendors that are on their site. But I know that they are those vendors are required to remit. It's just a how that is foreign to us.
Go ahead, George.
Thanks, Andrew. Evan, just two quick questions, and I think I already know the answer to both of them, but I'm just being thorough. First of all, the last time we did this, one of the issues that came up was the impact on local businesses, and we had a lot of local businesses come to our meetings and complain, and you're gonna put me out of business, you're gonna force me to move or something like that. Clearly, since we look around in the communities that have local option taxes are full of businesses, that it isn't hurting. But I'm just wondering, in setting this up, just did you come across anything that had studied this when communities implement this? Does it have an impact on local businesses? Do you know? Are you aware of anything like that? My second question, very quick, just a sentence or two, because I know you just went through this. Why did the town choose not to do this? Well, if you could just summarize it in a couple of words, why did they decide they didn't want to do it? Thanks.
I think you all know there's been a lot of issues coming before the town board, and it was very hard to find time to get this in front of them, and they feel that this late in the budget season and in the year, they just didn't want to go through it at this point. As for impact on local businesses, everybody's different in the local business, right? Whether they're selling hamburgers and beer or countertops or refrigerators, right? So one of the things that just to use Colchester as an example, Colchester did some surveying, they did some public outreach, and they also felt that if they could use some of these proceeds to offset the cost of businesses, like some property tax relief, not tremendous, but a little bit. They had some figures that the average person spends this. They get a lot of tourism and they get a lot of people coming through their community that derives this kind of money. And if they're not taxing the property owners for roads and sidewalks and buildings and upkeep, that's a good balance for the use of the tax. That's why you'll see in my write-up, you may want to look at some portion, I believe it's under number 2, for some type of property tax, and that would go into the general fund. And if your sales taxes exceed what you think you're doing or thought you're going to get, you can adjust accordingly. If you get less, you have rooms to adjust. But you will not have a shortage of projects to use the funds on. I can guarantee you that.
Thank you, George. Raj, you're next.
Thanks. Going back to the zip code thing. So Evan, it sounds like you're saying the last four, that extra four might be suitable for the tax department to be able to tell what zone, what city versus town. Because I think the GIS would sort of work, right, for Vermont-based businesses. But if you're some small business in North Dakota selling something to Vermont, technically now you've got to collect this and remit it. Amazon has to, and that's something that came up before. I just don't know if the tax department has an answer for that yet. But
yeah, I think that's a problem that can be solved once it's known that the community wants to support the tax. I could tell you with a conversation with IT and GIS, we have every address that exists in the village. We have every address that exists in the town. They're in a database. We are able to separate them out because they're already separated out. Those that start with a 01 is the village. Those are in 02 are the town. So they're already, we produce maps that are village and town. So they were relatively confident with a little bit of work and with guidance from state, we could come to whatever they need.
And as far as CVE goes, I'm wondering about, they do camping back there. I wonder if that, some of that is, that's a private campground, nonprofit or not, they probably it's an accommodation, and also ticket sales. So if, for instance, a higher ground sells a ticket, they might sell it at their box office in South Burlington, but if the end venue is in Essex, and Essex Junction, has a local option tax, is that concert ticket, because it's happening and being delivered in Essex Junction, going to be receivable for our lot? With 12 to 15 concerts, what is it, 12 concerts there a year? There's probably something there, and and I'm sure the community would be very interested in sort of leveraging that space. And that's one way to put it. I guess that's it. The one thing I will say, with the whole survey and the process that went out, I think if we do that again, and this is just friendly feedback for whoever put it together, if we do that again, it'd be helpful to sort of present those survey questions with information to lead. It's sort of like a leading survey, but these aren't political surveys, so it's sort of allowed. So something like the local options tax, adds a 1% tax to your cell phone, blah 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 bills. Basically giving them some information and then asking them how they feel about it. The survey seemed to just sort of ask people how they felt about it, and it left it up to their level of knowledge, and accurate knowledge or not. And so seeing the results, and hearing the feedback that was given to the select board and could have been given to us, I was sort of questioning what we were supposed to do with that.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to denigrate whoever put the time into doing that, but there was sort of my question when the survey was presented in the first place, is something that was going to go out. Because all those years ago when this was presented, sitting through that select board meeting or the joint, whatever that meeting that was, there's just the level of misinformation in that decision meeting was crazy. And I kind of feel like that's where we're at again. So
Yeah.
I hope this time around we can present, like Andrew did in 2019, what is the use case for this? What are we up against? What are we looking forward to? Why are we considering this? What can it bring us? What does it go against? How much might we make? And I think just like in 2019, I think if that use case and all of this is presented logically to the village, people will respond. If they know that they can get X number of dollars out of the previously not nonprofit fairgrounds, and we can keep the fairgrounds there, I think they'll see that as a win-win, for instance.
Also provide a lot of police protection and fire protection to that property.
Right. And
which is tax exempt.
And as far as businesses go, we are surrounded now, not on all sides, generally speaking, just because I'm sure I'll be quoted. There are local options tax collecting towns in our vicinity, some of them connected to us. Potentially, yes. And, you know, as someone who had to collect it, my clients paid it. I didn't pay it. I had one more line on my sales tax return to fill out. That's how difficult it was. So it never chased anybody away from me, and I don't see it chasing anybody away. And I think, again, that's an, like you were talking about Colchester, I think that's an engagement question, you know, and so I appreciate it.
And the town that I forgot is South Burlington,
Right.
which is receiving several $1 million in the local options tax, as does Williston.
I appreciate the way you've brought it back to us with a lot more info and some background. So thanks.
I would just say, you know, and I know this is, I'm sitting here right outside Five Corners. It's now 8:45 at night, and there's cars coming in and out of Five Corners. I have been in Five Corners at 7:30 in the morning, 7 in the morning. I can see the traffic patterns where people are coming down Route 15 from all the communities to the east and north of us, right? They're all coming through the community. They come in the morning, they leave in the afternoon. All through the weekend, people are driving through Five Corners. All of that traffic is not generated from this community. A good portion of it is generated from outside the community. Yet we provide them police protection. We provide them fire. Our businesses provide them services. And so the question is, do you want to also look into tapping a little bit of that traffic and that service back to your own community? It's just a different way of looking at it.
Thank you, Evan and Raj. Dan, go ahead.
Yes, yeah, I was gonna say that I kind of said on my breath that South Burlington was the one you forgot. But speaking of South Burlington and their former manager, Kevin Dorn, I don't know how many of you are aware, but they were early on in the process. They had the local option tax, and I just caution everyone, I support the idea of the local option tax. It was brought up back when I was running for the board back in 2011. I remember that discussion then. I was opposed to it, but things have changed in our community, in the area, in the county. A lot more communities are using it. But my caution is that becoming reliant on that, it's not necessarily a given that you're going to get as much as you think out of it every year. Kevin Dorn went to see if he could get the community to go up to 2%, to double the local option tax there. And my caution is, it's just like drugs. You can get addicted to it and you want more. You can always find more reason to get more. And it's like anybody. You make $1 million a year, you can be bankrupt. You can blow $1 million a year. You live within your means is what I'm trying to say. And I'd say prioritize capital improvement projects, which help the community. Anything like Evan brought up, helping out the businesses in our community, using some of the money towards that. So it's going back to them. I think it's a positive thing.
Thanks, Dan. And I'll throw it out. You know, one of the more successful things that we have done in the last couple of years is the Out and About program. I mean, that's a very good weekend for lots of local businesses in sales receipts. That is funded through the general fund for some of those vouchers. It's a great program. It could be expanded, but special events that bring people to the center of the village and bring the village back into the village. I've heard that expression more than once. Those are the types of ideas that the community could have, again, for the use of these funds.
Amber, your hand is up. I hope I didn't cut you off before. Okay.
No, I thought of two other questions. One really quickly is, can we also include with the FAQs, the list of towns that's also on the state website? And then question for you, Andrew, you said you don't want us to make a decision tonight about whether we want to put this on the ballot. So I'm just curious as to what your thoughts were as to next steps, time frame wise and stuff. Because I do think that one of the most important pieces of this is the education piece. And so I want to make sure we're getting ahead of it as quick as we possibly can if we are going to make a decision to put this on the ballot this year.
So in terms of the next steps from here, my hope would be that at our next meeting, we can have answers to the questions that have been raised, the questions that are in the memo, so that way we can then make a decision soon about whether to go forward and how we want to go forward in terms of, do we then want to do any kind of public information opportunities specifically for this, and or just include it in like the typical mailer that goes out in advance of the ballot to make sure the community understands what they're voting on.
And Andrew, I would imagine probably like last year, there'll be an information meeting the night before, or a day, or, what used to be the annual meeting, but because of COVID, will probably be virtual. That would be also a good time to reprise your local options tax presentation from a couple years ago.
Absolutely. One thing I wanted to just quickly address is one of the questions on here was about how we would use the funds. For me personally, the way that I've thought about this is, for one, I pointed it out with the capital budget. We see that in FY25, we're going to need more money to help pay for the infrastructure improvements that our community needs. So this would be one way to help get funds from people who don't live here, so that way we're not solely relying on property taxpayers to pay for the capital infrastructure that's used by everybody who visits this community. So that would be one use for it. Another use I'd love to see, if we have the funds for it, would be to start a sidewalk replacement fund. One of the things that Ricky Jones had talked about on the capital committee years ago was how much he wished he had some amount of money to be able to replace little sections of the sidewalk every year, so that way it would be similar to a rolling stock fund of replace it when it needs it, instead of doing full sidewalk replacements, as that would be a more cost-effective way of going about it. And then again, if there were some funds left over, some of us received, I don't know if it went to all the trustees, but an email about a community in Maine who was doing some participatory budgeting in regards to ARPA. And this could be a way where, if there are funds, we could have a permanent source to be able to have some funding that could be used through a participatory budgeting process to really have the community decide how to use these funds, instead of having to be us to present to voters to have them vote on. So I think that there are some options here that would be, one, help to reduce our reliance on the property tax, as well as help to engage the community in the budgeting process. Trustees, any other questions, comments? Are we good to move on?
Thank you.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Marguerite. I think you're driving. Thanks for bringing up the agenda. So next would be the discussion and possible action about contracts for the town of Essex. And I'm assuming this is Brad.
Yes, and there was another agenda item that discuss the process for annual meeting and other ballot items.
Thank you. I was just testing you. Not true at all. What Brad said, discussion about the process, annual meeting.
Yeah, just to let you know, I sent you out all of you an email. We are expecting the state to pass legislation that is going to have the ability for town and village meetings to go virtual for the annual meeting, including whether you do a information meeting the night before. That was passed by the Senate. It was going to the House. I do not know if they took it up as is, but we are according to the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, we are expecting it to pass in some form and be signed by the governor.
Yep.
And I would highly recommend not packing 250 to 300 people into an auditorium with COVID.
Considering that as of this point in time, all of us trustees are remote, there is nobody in the room with you, Evan. Or what town meeting TV, are they there with you? That doesn't matter. Considering that we're all remote, it absolutely makes sense to continue to do what we did the past couple of years of having a remote annual meeting, having the annual presentation, so the annual meeting itself be remote. Mailing ballots, I think, yes, we absolutely want to go ahead and do that again. It's proven to be very successful in engaging more people in our community to vote. So I think in terms of the process, same thing as last year and the year before. George?
I'm muted. Hang on a second. Okay, there we go. I can remember last year, did we send out a newsletter? I mean, we always have, but I can't remember if we did not do it. Like, we did it last year.
Yep.
Okay, I'm seeing Evan nod his head painfully. Yes, that was another thing he had to do. All right, but I just want to say, if we're gonna, this might be a good year if we mail out a newsletter to be to really in a good, simple but direct way describe the current budgeting situation, even though it looks like ARPA is going to rescue us from having this god-awful tax increase, but also to update people on what's exactly going on. And I just wanted to raise that that is a significant part of the, and we want to make sure we don't, I mean, I just think that a lot of the times we just sort of find some kind of fun or, off subject to talk about. I think this time around, we really need to be very directed about what we, right up front with people about what's going on. And I just had one other thought, that the process of independence has always meant that village taxes would go up. We always knew that. This is to put in the newsletter, but the idea is that the town taxes go away. And so in this transition period, we're experiencing one half of that phenomenon, but not the other half. There you go.
Yep, I wholeheartedly agree with you. And to Amber's point earlier about like the local options tax, if we decide to go forward with this, and how do we help to inform the community? I think one of the things that within that newsletter, I think my my letter to the community may have been like a page or page and a half. I can probably bring that down to a couple paragraphs, and then we can better use that real estate for these types of purposes to make sure that again our community is well informed as to what it is they're voting on.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah. And if we maybe have to throw in another page to again make sure that the community understands, it's well worth it.
Get it. Watch the cost of that, Andrew. That's expensive. But those extra pages.
We can do another town meeting TV interview, Andrew.
Yeah,
that's true.
You can do a half-hour presentation in advance. You love those.
Yeah, they're good times.
Good on them.
I always love my town meeting TV time.
Yep.
Andrew, there are two specific things that I was wondering if the trustees wanted to discuss having on the April ballot. One is, as you know, your current fund balance threshold is 10%, and there have been recommendations or discussions with Sarah over time to increase that fund balance threshold to 15 or 20%. I think she used some numbers that you should be around, based on your current budget, would be around 16 or 17%. So picking 15 or 20 to move that to at some point, it sounds like from one of her last communications, it was something that was voted on. And so it would need to be voted on again to change. And then the other question I had is cannabis and whether or not the village anticipates wanting to have that on their agenda.
Great question. Cannabis, I don't think our board has had an opportunity. Yeah, we haven't had an opportunity to really discuss it in any kind of depth. So I don't think that in terms of making that decision tonight, I don't think we're there. With the other fund balance, I wouldn't be opposed to going to 15%. My only hesitancy in that is, again, should separation not pass? is that again something that we're okay right now, and so do we want to keep it as a status quo for now? I think, as I say, I'm leaning more towards keeping it at 10. But with both of those things, I'd like to hear what the other trustees have to think as well. And Raj, with your hand up, why don't you go first?
Just a quick question. 30 days is the warning for what's the warning time? I can't remember. Is it 45 days?
I think the March 8th meeting.
I think it's 30 to 40 days out, Raj.
So for our meeting is the,
Yeah, it's no less than 30 and no more than 40.
all right,
Yeah.
and our meeting's the first Tuesday, right? First
Yep.
Wednesday. Wait, when's our vote?
April.
All right.
So it's that March 8th meeting is our last time.
March 8th meeting is our last time. Okay, thanks. I was just thinking about terms of cannabis and, you know, the town is going to have it on their ballot. And if we don't get it on ours and hear what our folks have to say, we'll be beholden to whatever they do and whoever they grandfather in. So we have to really get it on our agenda very quickly in the next meeting or two, so we can talk about it, figure out what we're doing with that in terms of zoning, checking with the planning commission perhaps, and see what we need to do to get it on our ballot and get our community educated about it somehow. Like I said, if we wait a year or 6 months for the November election, the town very well could issue licenses and those businesses would be here and grandfathered in should the village decide otherwise. So just something to keep in mind.
Good point. Go ahead, George.
I agree with what Raj just said completely. Second that emotion. And the fund balance, Andrew, I second that emotion for you. I think it should stay at 10%. Yeah, I would. It'd be great if it was 15%, but it would kick up. We would have to find a way to make that happen financially. So I would, keep our fingers crossed, whistle past the graveyard, but I would keep it at 10% right now.
So far, I'm hearing, yes, we want to vote on cannabis in April and keep fund balance at 10%. Is anybody in disagreement with any of those?
And Andrew, I don't have it in front of me. I'll go back and clarify on the fund balance language. What my recollection is that the policy says that if there's more than 10%, that you must assign it. And so the goal would be to change that to 15%. I don't believe that the current writing requires you or it doesn't allow you to go below that number. It just means you must assign over a certain number. But I will clarify that just so that we're talking apples and apples.
Okay.
I appreciate that. Evan, did I hear you go there?
I was just going to say, for good governance, you should have the 10%, but I would say that was your floor, and 15 is actually better for operations and things such as like we just went through. If the federal government hadn't come back and given us funding for lost revenue, you'd be possibly dipping into your reserves. So that's one of the things. Nobody expected a pandemic to come, but it did. And by the way, it still hasn't gone away. Hence, we're all here remotely for the most part. And that's what reserves are supposed to help you to do. That and or something that, you just didn't, you hoped the roof would go another couple of years, but it didn't. So.
Yeah. And similar to that, with global warming, climate change, and the ever increasing severity of the storms that we're getting, we just had the Halloween storm a few years ago, wreaking havoc on the Densmore culvert, and so being able to have a piggy bank to dip into for those types of emergency occasions is absolutely necessary.
To quote one of my contemporaries, savings never go out of style.
Go ahead, Raj.
So we have, I have to scroll up, 400 or $500,000 in the Economic Development Fund. And Sarah indicated earlier that there may not be very many guardrails on that.
Guardrails on that.
So I don't know how, I can't recall the memo that spells out how much of that is spoken for, if any, but that is a fairly significant sum that admittedly could be spent sort of at any time, but that's also there. And not a small percentage of the budget. And so having that sit there when we were talking about the budget earlier, it does, you know, it's just a lot of money to be in the fund right now. So if we're talking about whether we should raise another serious chunk of money for the fund balance, I'd want to talk about what we do with the Economic Development Fund first, I think.
Maybe if I could, a reminder that the property that the village bought in front of Firebird for a park, those funds are coming out of the Economic Development Fund to actually build that space from and do some remediation of the soil and build a pocket park. So that well, I don't think it's going to take 400,000. I would suggest it's going to take 50 to 75% of that.
Yeah, I was trying to recall how much, right. I thought it was less, but I was trying to recall how much is going to come out.
If we can get some grants, that would also be good, but that's on the docket for those funds. And also the village has ideas. It may want to purchase parking opportunities in the downtown from property owners. That's still out there. So good thoughts, Raj. If those projects get done and there's funds left over, you may want to look at other opportunities to build your reserves.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, I just want to comment, Raj. I did disagree a little bit with Sarah. I think she interpreted that statement, that the second passing of the extension of the Economic Development Fund, maybe Amber will like this, a little broadly, perhaps. I think if you look at the original wording and the original intent, it was pretty specific for what it's supposed to be spent on. And I think that would, I got to imagine that would kind of extend to the second piece. And right, and by the way, I think it's going to be 700,000 that's in there now. And I mentioned that I think it might be good to know if we can take a little bit of that or some of that money and use it for another purpose. But I would defer to Claudine on that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't defer to Sarah, and with no disrespect whatsoever to Sarah, but I would want to get Claudine's because I think there were some pretty specific limits put on that fund.
George, you're right on the numbers. That there's 600,000 now. You're supposed to add 115 in FY23. All that's been identified is 5,000 for the one Main Street project, and then they're supposed to come back to you for a request for an actual expenditure. And this is on page 60 in your document. What was approved originally was, shall the voters add 1 cent to the tax rate to establish a fund for village capital improvement projects designated by village trustees. So it is quite broad.
Well, I got to do it because I think you have to go into the dialogue, and I mean, I think you have to go into a little bit more of the background of it and what it's been used for already. But again, I think I would like to get, and we're not even anticipating doing it, so it's probably no sense. It's wasted breath having this discussion right now. But if we were, I would really want to have Claudine let us, just give her stamp of approval to it. I would recommend that anyway.
The other thing I would also add is when we're talking about village downtown capital improvement projects, let's also not forget we have the hopeful earmark for the train station. We also have the Crescent Connector coming in this upcoming year. So the potential in terms of continued investments in our downtown are going to be there. Right. And I know one of the things that we talked about when we first presented this to the community is from our trip to St. Albans,
Right.
And the ability to do things like having a revolving loan fund for our downtown businesses to help with improvements to the facades was something that was very appealing to the trustees at the time, and is something that we haven't really had the time to to explore doing. And so I think as we transition to a city and start to have more time to dedicate to our own needs, having this type of an account could be very beneficial.
Right. And I would add that that fund and the projects that it has paid for so far, ultimately you could trace all of that back to a bunch of community engagement projects that happened years ago. But just because they happened years ago, that doesn't make them any less valid today, because they require, as any a long-term community engagement project today. So I wouldn't be happy to see a new community engagement project take money away from an old community engagement project. I think when the community sort of directs funds and wants something done generally, I think I guess I'm, as the senior member here, I want to see these things get finished up. I hate the idea that you have one big effort to accomplish something, and then just because you don't have the staying power to see it through, it doesn't get done. Anyway, you know where I stand on this. Thanks.
I think we've finished this discussion pretty well here. So hearing nothing else from staff or trustees, we get to move on to the next agenda item. And this one, I swear, is Brad's about the contracts with the town of Essex.
Yes. Page
Great.
78 is where they start. So there are 3 agreements that are in your packet. I guess I just want to clarify. So these were discussed at the December 13th joint meeting briefly. My interpretation from that conversation was that there was not any great feedback by either board, and the bullet points, the high level bullet points, were ready to be developed into agreements. It sounds like the select board has yet to have a discussion about those bullet points in executive session or at a meeting. And there's maybe a thought that they wanted to before we proceeded. So I apologize if we've jumped the gun. So at this point, these 3 agreements have been drafted for you all to review. If you have feedback or suggestions for change, we could make those and we could get them to the select board for their meeting this next week.
And I did have a conversation with Select Board Chair Watson that he would at least appreciate the ability to have this on their agenda at the next meeting, as that would help to facilitate our joint meeting discussion as well, and to hopefully then put these contracts to bed. So Amber, why don't you kick it off?
I had one very minor comment on the Indian Brook agreement. In paragraph 11, I think there was just a holdover of cutting and pasting in all of the various agreements, that the line that starts "should the village become the city" should be deleted, because this contract is actually with the city, not the village. Other than that, I'm good.
Good point, Amber.
So just remove that line, Amber.
Yes.
Yes. Yep. That one sentence: should the village become the city at any time, this agreement shall remain in effect between the city and the town, because it is already with the city.
Great.
I didn't have any comments. I thought that it was, I thought these were very reflective of our earlier conversation. Do any other trustees have comments, questions, concerns? Not seeing anything.
Okay, so the next one starts on page, oh God.
Sorry, are we just sticking to one contract, or are we going over all of them?
Let's go over all of them.
Okay. So I did forget, I had one other comment on the shared financial. In the term section 1. Yes, I wrote a note to myself about the language is this agreement shall expire on June 30th unless earlier terminated by either municipality pursuant to section 6. And yet section 6 talks about both municipalities terminating the agreement. So I was a little confused by the language saying either municipality, but then referring to both municipalities. I think the intention was both unless one of the things in A or B essentially happened, that both municipalities have to sign on to the termination of this agreement for it to be valid. I think that was the intention.
Yep, I think we'll just remove by either municipality. So just say unless earlier terminated pursuant to section 6.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good catch though. There was some different thought processes going on and that just got missed. So thanks.
Yep. That's it for me, I promise.
That's fine. They're welcome.
I was gonna say, I didn't catch him. I appreciate it.
Just to clarify, Andrew, both the finance and the clerk treasurer agreements are ones that are relevant to be signed now. So as soon as both boards approve them, they will go out for your signatures. And so they are not dependent on whether or not the city charter passes. There's language in the clerk treasurer agreement that talks about if the city charter passes, but otherwise the agreements themselves are between the village and the town.
I'd be happy to just contact Andy to make sure that he also understands that for the conversation.
Great.
Raj, go ahead.
Yeah, seeing as that's the case, Brad, has Claudine reviewed these?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. They came from her and Kristen.
Trustees, anything else?
I'm good. Good job.
Yes, as always. Brad, thank you. Do we need a motion on these to approve of them?
I don't think so. I think I'll just take those 2 edits and make those, and then I will get these over to for the select board for their packet next week, and then they will be on the joint agenda on the 24th.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Brad. Raj, your hand is up. Is that on this or? Okay. So the next agenda is discussion and possible action about a contract negotiations with an employee. Trustees, I emailed you all a blind carbon copy about this. I didn't receive anything else. So I believe that we're actually okay with going into open session and not going into executive session for this. Are we in agreement, or does anybody have anything they want to talk about in executive session? Okay. Now y'all are gonna have to bear with me. I don't have the motion language prepared. Bless you, Evan. So this is in regards to the severance agreement, and I'm just wanting to get the title accurate so that way when we make the motion, it is appropriate. So I believe the motion would be looking for the trustees to approve the separation agreements between the town of Essex, the village of Essex Junction, and Evan Teach.
I'll second.
I was just saying that's what the motion should be if someone wants to make.
Oh, okay. I thought you were making the motion. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Nah, I'll throw that out there just to see.
Why don't you make that motion?
I'll make the motion of what I just said.
Okay, and I'll second that.
Thank you, George. Is there any further discussion on that motion?
No.
Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Great, that passed unanimously. And as I had mentioned earlier, I do not want that motion, that vote, or anything else to be construed in any way as a
No.
dissatisfaction or displeasure of the service of Evan Teach, because that would not be further from the truth. Evan, I've said this before publicly and privately with you. We do thank you for your time here for our community. You have done great work here. It does not bring me joy to be to this place as to where we are. And so I do just want to make sure that publicly it is again stated that thank you. I
Yes.
appreciate your work here.
Here, here, absolutely.
Thank you for the kind words.
And as I continue to fumble out of that, we now go to the consent agenda. I would entertain a motion if somebody wanted to make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Dan. Is there any further discussion on that motion?
Yes, there is. I want to deeply thank Amber Tebow for becoming our CCTV representative. Amber, thanks so much. I'm glad you did that, and go get them.
Thanks, George.
Yep.
Great. So we have the motion. We have a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, pass unanimously again. With the reading file and board member comments, the only thing I wanted to mention, while it's been a few weeks, I just want to take a moment and thank the Public Works crew for their work on Christmas morning and during Christmas Day. There was a significant freezing rain sleet event, which prevented a lot of travel earlier in the morning. And while I understand that some may say, hey, that's the job they signed up for. When you sign up for a job to keep our streets and our community safe like that, in the back of your mind, you know that that may be a possibility, but it's one of those things, especially for those who have young kids either in their own home and or grandkids, you don't think you're ever really going to have to deal with. And I really appreciate the Public Works crew for taking the time to do that work and to take time away from their family, away from their loved ones, and spending it to make sure that those of us who traveled could do so to have to celebrate the day with those away from the home. So I appreciate that service to our community that very likely is going unrecognized. So Evan, if you could please pass that appreciation on to Rick Jones and his staff for their work. It would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
Shall do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Trustees or staff, are there any other comments for tonight?
I'll jump in along the same lines. I want to send a warm thanks and appreciation for Steve Shaw, who's on our planning commission. He's a solid person and been a wonderful addition, and it was a great appointment by us. And plus, he's awesome because he's a geologist. And I hope this isn't the last we've heard of him. I think he's just going to kind of a busy phase right now, and I hope he's going to come back to us because he's got so much to give, and I thank him for the time he's given us.
Absolutely. Thank you for calling that out. Amber, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that and thank Steve as well, as they sat for many years with Steve. As far as I know, Steve is still on the Capital Committee.
There you go. Okay.
So
we got a little piece of him, huh?
We do have a little piece of him.
All right.
I wasn't going to say it because I didn't know if it was just an omission or if he is only resigning from the planning commission.
I suspect that probably what happened was his term is up on the planning commission, and that drove that. But we have not met as a capital committee in a long time.
Right.
So the capital committee requirement is a lot less than the planning commission. So I'm hopeful that it wasn't an omission. But that does leave the planning commission seat vacant on the capital committee as another topic of conversation.
So for anybody who may be watching this meeting, either live or recorded, if you would like to participate in your community and help to define the way that it looks in terms of development that happens in our community, please apply to the Village Planning Commission, potentially City Planning Commission. Information can be found at essexjunction.org. And there's your PSA.
Awesome.
You have
So
a
unless
bright future in infomercials.
Oh, thank you. I've been working on it. If there is nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move adjourn.
Thank you, Raj. I think
Second.
so. I was gonna say someone I think said it. I don't know who. It sounded like Amber. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 Anybody who doesn't want to, too bad. Passing unanimously. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Enjoy
Evan.
your night.
Thanks,
Good
Evan
night.
Marguerite.
Hi, guys.